There comes a moment in every person's life where they are tested, not with a battlefield, not with a crowd chanting their name, but with silence. The kind of silence that follows when truth becomes unpopular, when justice makes you the only one standing, when your heart knows what's right, but the world is walking in the opposite direction. And this is where Ashura speaks, not through bloodshed, not through sorrow alone, but through the fire of moral clarity, through the strength to say no, even if everyone else says yes. Ashura is not just a date in the calendar. It is a mirror that reflects who you are when pressure mounts, when truth is costly, and when loyalty is a test. It's the story of a man who didn't raise his voice, but raised the standard of righteousness. A man who could have chosen comfort, but walked straight into hardship because his heart was tied to something far greater than this world. Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, stood not because he loved confrontation. He stood because truth was being buried under palaces, power, and fear. And while many remained silent, he chose to walk into the storm alone. Why? Because he knew that truth doesn't depend on numbers. It depends on courage. It depends on conviction. And conviction doesn't scream. It simply refuses to bow. Allah tells us in the Quran, "And do not incline toward those who do wrong, lest you be touched by the fire." This is not about rebellion. This is about responsibility. The responsibility of guarding truth when it's being rewritten. The responsibility of protecting faith when it's being distorted. The responsibility of saying, "I cannot support this," even if it costs you your comfort, your friends, or your status. Ashura reminds us that silence can be betrayal, and that speaking the truth even softly is louder than armies. It reminds us that being with the majority means nothing if the majority is wrong, and that being alone with truth is better than being surrounded by falsehood. This isn't about becoming harsh. It's about becoming honest. Honest with yourself. Honest with your Creator. We live in a world where right and wrong are constantly being redefined, where power and popularity have replaced principle, where injustice wears a polished smile, and truth is mocked for being inconvenient. In this chaos, Ashura whispers to your soul, stand firm, stay awake, don't sell your principles for acceptance. The Prophet never raised his family to chase status. He raised them to uphold justice, even if it cost them their lives. That's what Hussein inherited. Not just the bloodline, but the backbone. He knew the path ahead was dark, but he also knew that walking away from it would be darker. This day is not for slogan. It is not for division. It is not a ritual of grief alone. It is a reminder, a painful, piercing, and powerful reminder that no matter how civilized we become, truth will always be tested. And when it is, your silence or your voice, your loyalty or your fear, your comfort or your conscience will define you. If the lesson of Ashura is buried under mourning without meaning, then we've missed the very essence of what Hussein died for. He did not fall so we could cry once a year. He stood so we could rise every single day with integrity, with clarity, and with unwavering commitment to truth. We're living in a time where numbers have become everything. How many people follow you, how many agree with you, how many stand beside you. But truth doesn't need a crowd to be real. It doesn't need validation to be right. It existed before people supported it, and it will remain after they walk away from it. The truth is like light. It just is. And when you realize that, you stop looking around and start looking within. When Hussein stood on the plains of Karbala, the world didn't see victory. It saw isolation. a handful of companions, no army to defend him, no political power to support him, no worldly assurance that this would end well. But Hussein wasn't measuring victory by numbers. He wasn't looking at the size of his group. He was looking at the weight of his responsibility. And what a lesson that holds for us, because we too face moments where we know what is right, but we hesitate. Not because we're confused, but because we don't want to be alone in doing it. There are times in life where the only one who will understand your choice is Allah. And in those moments, your test isn't about knowing the truth. It's about choosing it without company, without applause, without backup. That's when sincerity is proven. When you're not doing something because it's popular or because it feels safe, but because it's right. That's when the heart connects to its true purpose. The Quran reminds us, if you obey most of those on earth, they will lead you away from the path of Allah. That verse doesn't talk about enemies. It talks about most people. It tells us something powerful. That following the crowd, even if their voices are louder, even if their path looks easier, might lead us away from the very one we claim to love. What this means is that being in the minority doesn't make you wrong, and being in the majority doesn't make you right. Sometimes you'll feel like the only one who cares about honesty in a space full of lies, the only one who lowers their gaze in a world that normalizes what's wrong, the only one who feels uncomfortable laughing at something disrespectful, the only one praying while others scroll. And you begin to question, why me? Why do I feel so out of place? But maybe that feeling isn't weakness. Maybe it's a sign that your heart is still alive, that it hasn't been desensitized, that somewhere deep inside you still remember what it means to belong to Allah first, not people. Hussein walked with that kind of heart, a heart that didn't count followers, it counted responsibilities. A heart that didn't ask, who's with me, but what does Allah want from me? And that question alone changes everything. It stops you from living for attention and starts pushing you to live with intention. It saves you from the false comfort of being accepted by everyone, and instead gives you the deeper comfort of being accepted by the one who sees everything. Instead gives you the deeper comfort of being accepted by everyone, and instead gives you the deeper comfort of being accepted by the one who sees everything. There's dignity in walking alone for the right reason. There's peace in knowing that even if no one understands you, Allah does. And there's reward in taking the harder path, not because you love hardship, but because you love truth enough to endure it. The world might call you extreme, it might label you outdated, but the angels are writing something else. They are writing that in a world where truth was twisted, you held on quietly, firmly, without needing a crowd to stand beside you. That's the legacy of Hussein, not just martyrdom, but the courage to walk alone, knowing full well that the companionship of Allah is worth more than the approval of all of humanity. It's easy to tell ourselves that being silent is neutral, that if we're not involved, we're not responsible, that looking the other way is somehow safer, wiser, maybe even more peaceful. But silence in the face of injustice is not innocence, it's a choice. And choices shape who we are, whether we speak or stay quiet. There's something deeply uncomfortable about seeing wrong and doing nothing, not because we don't care, but because we feel trapped. We think, if I say something, I might lose people. If I take a stand, I might be misunderstood. If I speak out, I might be misunderstood. And those fears are real. But the question is, what are you protecting when you choose silence? Your peace or your position? Injustice thrives not just when evil people act, but when good people choose comfort over courage. When truth becomes a personal secret rather than a public trust. When morality is reduced to private feelings, while wrong is normalized in public. Allah reminds us in the Quran, do not conceal the testimony, for whoever conceals it, his heart is sinful. Is the man who conceals the testimony, for whoever conceals it, his heart is sinful. That's not just about legal testimony. It's about the kind of moral testimony every heart holds. That inner voice that knows something is wrong and begs to be heard. When we ignore it, we're not just being passive, we're becoming part of the silence that protects injustice. Hussein's stand wasn't just against a man, it was against a mindset. A mindset that said, just obey, just keep quiet, just let it go. A mindset that had taken root in the Muslim world, where corruption was becoming religion and fear was being sold as wisdom. He didn't have weapons of power, but he had a voice, and he used it, not to shout, but to refuse, to make it clear, this is wrong, and I will not pretend it isn't. Sometimes the most powerful statement is not a long speech. It's simply not cooperating with wrong, not laughing at what offends your faith, simply saying, not cooperating with wrong, not laughing at what offends your faith, simply saying, not cooperating with wrong. Not laughing at what offends your faith, simply saying, not cooperating with wrong. Not laughing at what offends your faith, simply saying, not cooperating with wrong. Not laughing at what offends your faith, not joining in with what you know is unfair. Not helping normalize what your heart cannot accept, even if it means you're alone at the table. Even if people think you're too serious, even if they call you difficult. The truth is, we were never meant to blend into falsehood. We were meant to rise with dignity, with humility, and with unwavering clarity. The Prophet taught us that when we see something wrong, we change it with our hand. If we cannot, we speak against it. And if we cannot even do that, then at least we feel it in our hearts. And that, he said, is the weakest form of faith. Meaning, doing nothing should never be a source of pride. If all you can do is ache inside, ache. If all you can offer is a private prayer, pray. But if you can speak, and you choose not to, then that silence becomes heavy on your record. Some silences are peaceful, others are loaded with quiet betrayal. The kind of silence that looks away from suffering. The kind of silence that stays friends with oppression because speaking would be inconvenient. That silence is not safety. It's a wound. A wound to your conscience, a wound to your relationship with truth, and eventually a wound to your standing before Allah. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to fight with everyone. But you cannot claim to follow the path of the Prophet while turning your face from injustice. Whether it's in your home, your workplace, your community, or your online voice. Your position matters. And your silence speaks louder than you think. Some people die speaking the truth, and others live in silence. But only one of them dies with honor. Being religious is easy when religion costs you nothing. When it's wrapped in comfort, when no one challenges your values, when your beliefs stay quietly in your heart and never come face to face with sacrifice. It's easy to pray when everyone around you prays. It's easy to be modest when modesty is celebrated. It's easy to believe in truth when truth doesn't make you stand out. But real strength is shown when your faith is tested. When doing the right thing starts to feel heavy, And when living by your values starts to isolate you, that's where courage is born. Not the kind of courage that comes with noise, but the kind that comes with stillness. The kind that whispers, stay firm, even when the world is pulling you the other way. The kind of courage that isn't fueled by ego, but by conviction. Quiet, sincere, unwavering conviction. You might pray 5 times a day. You might fast. You might wear the proper clothes, speak the right words, quote the right verses, and may Allah love you for it. But when truth is under attack, and falsehood is being paraded in front of you, when the people around you bend their values to fit the trend, or dilute their morals to stay light, what will you do? The difference between religiosity and righteousness is subtle but deep. It lies in the heart that chooses truth over acceptance, principle over popularity, sacrifice over convenience. It lies in the moment you realize that faith is not just in your hands or your tongue, but in your spine, in your ability to stay upright when everyone else is bowing to something they know is wrong. This is why Hussein matters, because he didn't just represent Islam, he lived it with every fiber of his being, not just through prayer, not just through family lineage, not just through knowledge. He lived it through resistance, through clarity, through sacrifice. And that's what made him a leader of the youth in paradise. Not because he prayed more than anyone else, but because when truth demanded action, he stood, even when the cost was everything. Because in truth, even when the cost was everything, Allah says, indeed, those who say, our Lord is Allah, and then remain steadfast, the angels descend upon them. Remaining steadfast is not just about rituals, it's about resilience. It's about holding your ground when your faith becomes a burden in other people's eyes. When people question your commitment, when they say, you're too strict, too backward, too different. When you're left out because you refuse to compromise your standards, that's when you find out whether your faith is built on sand or stone. The Prophet never promised ease. He promised reward. And he warned us that there will come a time when holding on to faith will be like holding on to burning coal. Why burning coal? Because it hurts. Because it tests your patience, your endurance, your sincerity. And still, you're told, hold on. If your belief doesn't translate into courage when it's needed, then it's just belief in theory. Real faith acts. It doesn't hide when truth is mocked. It doesn't nod along just to keep things smooth. It doesn't stay silent while values are stepped on. It responds, not always with confrontation, but always with clarity. One of the greatest lies we tell ourselves is that we'll take a stand when it really matters. But standing up doesn't begin on a battlefield. It begins in smaller moments, in conversations, in choices, in quiet acts of resistance against what displeases Allah. If you can't say no to the small wrongs, how will you face the great ones? This world rewards what is loud, easy, and trendy. But Allah rewards what is sincere, even if no one sees it. He rewards the one who doesn't just wear religion like a label, but lives it like a mission. The one who can still say yes to truth when it's lonely, and still say no to falsehood when it's popular. Piety, the battlefield, the thirst, the pain, the sacrifice. It stirs emotion, it breaks hearts, and it should. But what gets lost in the morning is something deeper, something more alive than death. We forget why he chose to die. That's where the real legacy lies, not in the tragedy, but in the reason behind it. He didn't walk toward martyrdom because he wanted to be remembered. He walked because he refused to be silent. He didn't lay down his life because he lost power. He did it because he wouldn't surrender his principles. He stood not because he was obsessed with fighting, but because his conscience wouldn't allow him to shake hands with falsehood. That's where his greatness begins. In the clarity of his intention, in the purity of his resistance, in the strength of knowing exactly who he was and what he would never become. When you peel away the history, the politics, the pain, what's left is a man whose heart belonged entirely to Allah. That's what gave him the courage to face what others ran from. That's what made him turn down safety when safety required compromise. That's what allowed him to smile in the face of death. He wasn't driven by ego. He wasn't trying to win a war. He was protecting something sacred, something priceless. He was protecting the soul of Islam from being manipulated by power. He saw a storm coming, a storm that would redefine truth, that would replace justice with control, and transform leadership into a throne of tyranny. And he knew that if he remained silent, that storm would sweep away the very teachings his grandfather had poured his life into. The same teachings that brought light to the deserts of ignorance. The same teachings that pulled people out of darkness and into dignity. He wasn't trying to make history. He was trying to protect truth. And truth in his eyes wasn't an idea. It was a trust. Something given by Allah. Something that couldn't be bent or sold or watered down. He wasn't obsessed with winning. He was committed to not losing himself. Not losing his values. Not watching from a distance while everything sacred was turned into a tool for control. That's what makes his death so powerful. Not the pain it caused, but the purity it revealed. A man who had everything to lose and still said, I will not give this up. A man who watched his family fall beside him and still did not question his stand. A man who had the option to step back, to sign the paper, to stay silent, and yet chose fire over falsehood, hunger over hypocrisy, death over disgrace. This is what love for Allah looks like when it reaches its peak. It stops asking, what will people say, and starts asking, what will Allah think of me? It stops measuring loss by the world's scale and starts measuring success by the weight of sincerity. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It's something deeper. It's stillness in the chest. It's conviction that nothing, not fear, not threats, not loneliness, can make you trade your values. Hussein's death moved the world. But his decision to die, that's what should move your heart. That's what should make you pause in your own life and ask, what am I living for? What am I willing to lose to stay firm in what I believe? Because his story isn't just about what happened in the past. It's about what we're choosing every day. Quiet choices, private moments, decisions no one sees but the one who sees everything. Loyalty becomes dangerous when it's blind. When it's given to power instead of truth, when it clings to a name, a flag, a group, even when that name has strayed, even when that flag is being flown over injustice. Real loyalty in the sight of Allah isn't about sticking with someone out of tradition or identity. It's about staying firm on what's right, even if the one you have to stand against is someone you once admired. Someone who once carried the same banner of Islam. Hussein wasn't confronting a foreign enemy. He wasn't at war with an outsider. He stood against someone from within the Muslim Ummah. Someone who claimed leadership, who dressed the part, who held power in the name of Islam. That's what made his stand so difficult and so necessary. Because when truth is manipulated by those in authority, when people in power start redefining righteousness to serve their own interests, then staying silent isn't loyalty, it's betrayal. It's easy to support the truth when it comes from those you already agree with. When the one speaking it shares your background, your title, your tribe. But what happens when the one committing wrong is someone respected, someone influential, someone in a position where criticizing them feels uncomfortable? That's when your loyalty is tested. That's when your sincerity is exposed. The companions of the Prophet didn't pledge allegiance to personalities. They pledged themselves to the truth, no matter who was speaking it, and no matter who was opposing it. If someone stood with Allah's commandments, they stood with them. If someone violated justice, even if it was someone close, they spoke out. That's the legacy they left behind. Allah doesn't ask you to be loyal to people at the expense of His commands. He asks you to be loyal to justice, to honesty, to integrity, even if it's bitter. Even if it costs you relationships, position, or peace. The Quran says, "O you who believe, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or your parents or your relatives." That verse doesn't make exceptions. It calls you to uphold truth, even when it breaks your heart, even when it turns you into the odd one out. When Hussein rose, he didn't rise to divide the Muslims. He rose because the line between truth and falsehood was being blurred. Because silence would have meant accepting that leadership could be passed like a crown, that fear could replace righteousness, that the public voice of Islam could be hijacked by someone who did not reflect its values. And too many people, out of fear or misplaced loyalty, were letting that happen. This is where we learn something powerful. Standing with truth isn't about fighting everyone. It's about refusing to be part of something wrong. It's about stepping back and saying, "Not in my name," even if no one hears you, even if everyone else stays quiet. Your silence won't save you on the day of judgment, but your honesty might. No one is above the truth. No name, no movement, no leader, no group. When truth becomes secondary to allegiance, the soul begins to rot. And when falsehood hides behind respected names, it becomes even more dangerous. Because it wears the costume of righteousness, but it poisons from within. Hussein's legacy teaches us that there's no one so high that they can't be questioned, and no cause so sacred that it cannot be scrutinized. If your love for someone leads you to excuse injustice, then that love is not love. It's weakness. But if your love pushes you to remind them of truth, to hold them accountable, even gently, then that is love with sincerity. We're not asked to be harsh, we're asked to be honest. Not to attack people, but to protect values. Not to create division, but to preserve purity. And when the time comes to choose between your loyalty to people and your loyalty to what's right, don't hesitate. Truth deserves your loyalty more than any name ever will. Some people speak the truth when it's safe, when it costs nothing, when it fits the mood of the room. But there are others, very few, who speak it when it's inconvenient, when it's risky, when it might push people away. They speak not to provoke, not to argue, but because silence would betray their soul. These are the people who are honored by Allah, not because of how loud their voice is, but because of how sincere their heart is when they speak. It's easy to pose what everyone already agrees with, to echo what's trending, to sprinkle truth where it won't offend anyone. But real strength shows when truth is spoken with balance, with wisdom, with compassion, but without fear. Not fear of being disliked, not fear of being misunderstood, not fear of being alone. That's the kind of clarity Hussein carried. A clarity that didn't need to shout, a clarity that didn't need to be liked. He wasn't trying to win the people. He was trying to remain true to the trust Allah placed in him. The world often confuses truth with tone. If someone speaks calmly, we say it's good. If someone speaks firmly, we say it's harsh. But truth isn't defined by the mood it creates. It's defined by the light it carries. And when it's delivered with sincerity, even if it stings, it heals. The Prophet once said that the most beloved form of struggle is to speak a word of justice in front of a tyrant ruler. Not behind his back, not anonymously, to his face. That's not just bravery. That's faith in its rawest form. Most people will never see the full cost of that kind of courage. They'll see the backlash, the isolation, the tension. But what they won't see is the inner peace that comes from being honest with your Creator. The kind of peace that can't be taken by anyone. Not by criticism, not by rumors, not by rejection. That peace only comes when you speak not to please the world, but to stay aligned with what is right. Truth without wisdom can hurt, but silence without integrity can destroy. The balance is in sincerity, in asking yourself before you speak, am I saying this for my ego or for the sake of Allah? Am I trying to be right or am I trying to speak what is right? If the answer is the latter, even if your voice shakes, even if your words come slowly, even if you're met with resistance, keep going. The angels are recording your intentions. Sometimes you will speak and it will fall on deaf ears. Other times it will plant seeds in hearts you'll never meet. You're not responsible for how people respond. You're responsible for what you carry. And if what you carry is truth, spoken with sincerity and patience, then you've done your part. On the day of judgment, when people are raised by their intentions, by their efforts, by their integrity, not by numbers or likes or approval, Allah will call forward those who were truthful in a time of confusion, those who did not twist their words to match what was popular, those who didn't dilute truth to keep people happy, those who, like Hussein, knew that even if truth leads to hardship in this world, it brings you closer to paradise in the next. Not every battle is won with a sword. Some are won with silence that refuses to lie. Some are won with a word that refuses to flatter. Some are won when a believer whispers the truth to power and walks away with nothing but the approval of their Lord.